Among the potential partners in the Trans-Pacific Partnership, or TPP, Vietnam is the only country that bans independent religious groups, the only country considered one of the world's worst violators of internet freedom. Vietnam harbors severe child labor and forced child labor violators, and regularly jails and tortures those who speak out for human rights, political inclusion, or the right to practice their religion. There are today over 100 prisoners of conscience in Vietnam. Nguyen Van Dai spent 4 years in jail and 4 additional years under house arrest for defending religious freedom and calling for greater democratization in Vietnamese society. He was detained again and brutally beaten last December for continuing his work. His arbitrary detention undercuts any claim that the current Vietnamese leadership can become a trusted U.S. partner. Prior to his arrest, I had the privilege of meeting with him in Hanoi at his law office at 10 Duane Tran Nhiep Street in December of 2005. I was deeply impressed with his passion for truth, his defense of universally recognized human rights, his faith, his extraordinary courage, and his deep and abiding love for Vietnam. He is truly a patriot. Nguyen Van Dai's wife, Vu Minh Can, is with us today to speak on his behalf and for the other prisoners of conscience in Vietnam. Her testimony is especially timely because President Obama will travel to Vietnam at the end of this month. A steady stream of State Department officials are going to Vietnam prior to the trip. In fact, Assistant Secretary for Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor, Tom Malinowski, is in Vietnam today. The administration should not try to whitewash Vietnam's record prior to the president's trip, but must make absolutely clear and unequivocal statements in support of democracy and free speech advocates, disfavored religious and ethnic minority groups, and human rights defenders. The unconditional release of Nguyen Van Dai and other prisoners of conscience should be a precondition of the president's visit. However, if the president goes without any conditionality, this subcommittee appeals to the president to demand the immediate and unconditional freedom and release of Nguyen Van Dai and the others. I also encourage the president to meet with those in Vietnam who share our interests in democracy and human rights in Vietnam. Doing so will send a clear message about U.S. interests to the vast majority of Vietnamese, some 66%, who were born after the Vietnam War ended. The administration should also make clear to the communist leaders in Hanoi that the further expansion of trade and security partnerships, the lifting of the arms embargo, is unacceptable until there is significant, verifiable, and irreversible improvements in human rights in Vietnam. Unfortunately, for the past 7+ years, the administration has failed to deliver such messages to victims of abuse anywhere. No tough message was delivered in Cuba, for example, despite an escalation of arrests and abuse. The administration seems eager to proceed with lucrative trade and to lift the ban on lethal arms sales to Vietnam without imposing any real conditions. That would be a colossal mistake. The administration surely will justify extending these generous benefits by arguing that lifting the trade barriers and expanding diplomatic engagement with Vietnam will bring about human rights and other positive advances. Such arguments have long been discredited, however, in China, for example, or more recently in Bahrain. And there is evidence such arguments failed miserably in Vietnam as well. In 2007, after the United States lifted its longstanding objection to Vietnam's membership in the World Trade Organization, Hanoi responded by launching the first of 3 waves of arrests that jailed more than 100 dissidents and introduced sweeping new laws restricting freedom of association, assembly, and the internet. In short, Vietnam's WTO membership allowed the communist government made it free to jail, torture, and to abuse. The pressure was off. Why would they not do so again? The communist leadership in Hanoi will take our benefits, our trade benefits, our security commitments, and continue repressing those seeking political reform and universal freedoms. The business of the Communist Party is staying in power and repressing those who may challenge their power. They will not embrace human rights improvements or the rule of law unless it is a condition of better relations with the United States. Vietnam needs the U.S. markets and security commitments much more than the United States needs Vietnam's markets and security cooperation. The administration should demand additional protections for human rights, internet freedom, and the rule of law as a condition of U.S. assistance. Not doing so is short-sighted, misguided, and fails to achieve long-term U.S. interests, and it throws the victims under the bus. One way to send an important message about U.S. policy priorities is to pass the Vietnam Human Rights Act, H.R. 2140, which I have reintroduced in this Congress and is now awaiting further action in the House and Senate. I would note parenthetically that past iterations that I've introduced the Vietnam Human Rights Act in previous Congresses have passed the House 3 times, only to be ignored in the Senate. The bill stipulates that the United States cannot increase non-humanitarian assistance to Vietnam until the President certifies that the government of Vietnam has made substantial progress in establishing human rights protections. The American people should not have to subsidize torture or underwrite the jailing of journalists, religious leaders, labor activists, or advocates of democracy or internet freedom. The bipartisan Vietnam Human Rights Act will restore the right priorities to U.S. policy towards Vietnam. The Communist Party is not Vietnam's future. That future lies with Nguyen Van Dai and many other advocates of political reform and human rights who seek our freedoms more than our trade. U.S. policy must send the unmistakable message to the government of Vietnam that human rights improvements are fundamental to better relations, critically linked to our mutual economic and security interests, and will not, I say again, will not be ignored or be bargained away. I'd like to now introduce our very distinguished witness today, Ms. Vu Minh Can, who is the wife of human rights lawyer Mr. Nguyen Van Dai, as I said earlier, who was arrested in December 16th to be exact, in 2015 under Article 88 of the Vietnamese Penal Code for, quote, conducting propaganda against the state. Since his arrest, Ms. Vu has been advocating for his release, meeting with international delegates, starting petitions and giving interviews with various media agencies to raise awareness on Dai's case. She has volunteered at a church in Hanoi and has been doing so since 2009. The church reaches out to many vulnerable groups, including those who suffer from drug addiction, orphans, and youth. In addition to providing support and counseling to those groups, Ms. Vu also assists with the daily financial management of the organization and works to promote and protect human rights through the church.